I have the distinct honor of introducing our guest speaker. If you've not heard her yet, you're in for a treat. She is a beloved minister here at CLF. She speaks here, she teaches classes here, she has a following of people that every time she wants to do a class, they follow her and say, yes. So we are so grateful to have Reverend Sherry in our midst. She came out of the Agape Center in Los Angeles, has served in many churches, Ohio, California, here in Arizona. She has been in New Thought for decades and decades. And the depth of this woman is the gift that she brings to us. So would you please help me give a warm CLF welcome to Reverend Sherry McCreary.
Thank you. Good morning. Reverend Sally always fails to mention that I was 5 when I started those decades and decades ago in Science of Mind. So thank you very much. Let's all just take a deep breath together here. And another. And a third one for good measure. You know, some years ago, I was nearly manic about having a red Jeep Grand Cherokee. And I had it on my vision board. Well, at that time, we called them treasure maps. And I talked to everybody about it. I prayed about it. I had my practitioner praying for it. And all around Northeast Ohio, at the car dealerships that I went to, they didn't have a red one. They had every color but red. But red was the only color I wanted, a red Jeep Grand Cherokee with black leather interior. And I got it, finally, got that Jeep Grand Cherokee. And I was a happy camper. And I drove it around, and I enjoyed it, and I loved it. And everybody in my office knew how much I really loved that Jeep Grand Cherokee. And so at that time, I was a prosecutor, and I worked downtown Cleveland, so I would drive to the rapid transit, which was the public transportation to downtown, park my car and drive and take the transit downtown. And so this particular day, I parked my car, went downtown, and when I came back out to my stop and got off, I didn't see my car. So I thought, well, maybe I didn't park at this stop today. Maybe I parked it at the next stop. So I waited for the next train to come along, and I got on it, and I rode down to the next stop. And my car wasn't there. So I took a deep breath, and I said, well, maybe Cheryl came and picked it up. So maybe I'll just call her and see if by chance she came and got the car. And I called her, and she said, no, why would I come and get your car? And I said, I was just hoping you did, because it's not here. And I finally had to admit that my car had been stolen. So I called the police, and they came out, took a report, and put it into the system so that the process got started about my stolen car. And I was really disappointed. I was really hurt. I couldn't understand why anybody would take my red Jeep Grand Cherokee with the black leather interior. But they did. Somebody took it. So I went home, and I put it in perspective. I said, well, it's just a car. I really love the car. Maybe they'll find it. Maybe there won't be too much damage. And sure enough, by midnight, the police called me and told me that they'd found the car. It wasn't damaged that much, but they needed to process it. So it would be a few days before I could get it. So I was okay. I went to work the next day. I happened to mention it to the supervisor in my department that my car had been stolen. He said, oh, that's awful. You love that car so much. And I said, yeah, but it's just a car. They found it. We'll get it back, and it'll be okay. Well, he mentioned it to a couple of other people, and they stopped by my office and said, oh, we heard that your car was stolen. How terrible that is. You must be really hurting because you love that car so much. And I went, yeah, I did, but it's just a car, and they found it, and it's going to It's going to be okay. I'm going to get it back in a couple of days. As the day progressed, more and more people stopped by my office, or when I went down the hall, they said, "Oh, you poor thing, your car was stolen. You love that car so much, you waited so long to get it. How can you stand it?" And I noticed that I was beginning to feel worse and worse and worse. And every time I turned around, somebody was either knocking on my door or stopping me to tell me, or calling me on the phone to tell me, "I'm so sorry your car was stolen. I'm so sorry you lost your baby. I'm so sorry." By 2 o'clock, I was so sick. My head was splitting. I didn't feel well. I was feeling so sad and so down and so depressed. I went into the supervisor's office and said, "You know what? I'm sick. I have to go home." And I left the office and I went home, and I was absolutely miserable. I went home, I got in bed, I carried on about how bad I felt, and I thought about it as the evening progressed. I'm not really feeling bad. My car was stolen. And I became aware of how I had let everybody else talk my energy down, talk my vibration down, talk me into feeling bad, talk me into suffering, which is what I was doing. I was really suffering. I started the morning out with, "It's just a car. I love the car. Somebody stole it. They got it back. I'll get it back." By evening, I was like, "Oh, my car. How could they do this? How will I get through this? I feel like I've been violated. I'll never be able to drive it again." That was my first conscious awareness that suffering is optional. That's the title of my talk today. Suffering is optional. Suffering is optional. I started the day off fine. Somebody stole the car. By the evening, I was suffering because I had allowed all the other energy, all the negativity, all of the poor you, and got into that poor me, and got into that place of suffering. And I really understood in a deep, deep way how suffering is optional. How we don't have control over things that happen oftentimes. We don't have control over outer conditions. We don't have control over the actions of other people. But we do have control over our response to it. We do have control over how we are going to respond, how we are going to react to particular situations. And I had control over that, and I just lost it. I just gave up my control over my own feelings, how I was going to respond, how I was going to react. And I really, really got clear about suffering being optional. You know, the definition of suffering from the dictionary is pain or distress or discomfort. And optional, of course, means available to be chosen or available to choose. And so I think that suffering is not only pain and distress and discomfort, I think it is the focus that we have on it. How much we focus on the pain, how much we focus on the discomfort, how much we focus on the loss, how much we focus on all of that. But the thing is, we have a choice. We can change our focus. We can change the way we look at things. We can change the way we respond. We can change the way we are going to act in whatever situation it may be, no matter how small or how big the loss may be. And I understand that there are losses that we have. There are things that happen in our lives that make us really get into that place of suffering, get into that place of focus, get into that place of experiencing physical or mental or emotional pain. And we still have a choice. We still have a choice. Ernest Holmes says that man suffers on his road to self-discovery. Man suffers on his road to self-discovery. We suffer on our road to self-discovery. And he says that even though we do, suffering is not God-ordained. It is not God-ordained. But we create our own experiences as we become individualized. We create our own experiences. This is the freedom we have to choose. He also says that freedom implies the possibility of suffering. It implies the possibility of suffering. Because if we are free only by virtue of the fact that there's a possibility that we can make one choice over another for any given experience that we have. we are free by virtue of the fact that we have the possibility to choose and to choose the experiences that we will have in our lives. And so this is what I mean about suffering being optional. We have a choice. And I think that choice is one of the greatest gifts that God has given us, the opportunity to choose how we're going to feel, what we're going to do, how we're going to respond, how we're going to act, what we're going to say. We can choose. And when we choose low, we can choose again high. And we can choose again high. And we can choose again high. Let's take a breath. Let's choose to breathe again. You know, the theme this month is, what's love got to do with it? Everything. What's love got to do with what I'm talking about here? Everything. Love has got everything to do with it. Love has got everything to do with everything. Love is not just a secondhand emotion. Love is not just a sweet, old-fashioned notion. Love is everything. Love is God. God is love. We are here for love. We are here to be revealers of God's love. We are here to be delivery systems for God's love. And so how we do that is determined by the choices we make. When we are in that place of suffering, when we're in that place of shutdown, when we're in that place of closing off, we can't be that delivery system because there's no space for God to work. There's no space for God to do anything but just stand at the door and knock. But when we can open up, when we can release, when we can let go, then we can be in that place of openness and availability where God can really walk right through and walk in the way that God wants to go and use us the way that God wants to use us for the reason that God created us. That's how we get through this life, and that's how we get to understand what love has to do with it. We have to set our intention to be places and spaces of love, places and spaces of God's love expressing, places and spaces for God's love to just continue to flow, continue to flow, continue to flow, continue to flow. And we do that over and over and over again by making the choices that we make in our lives to be that place and space for God to just shine, for God to just shine. I'm reminded of Jake Olson. Take a breath with me, please. I'm reminded of Jake Olson, who is a long snapper for USC Trojans football team. Now, I have no idea what a long snapper is. But the thing about Jake Olson that makes him special is that he's blind. And he's the blind long snapper for the USC football team. He came to my awareness when he was 16, because at that time, he was a golfer. He was blind. His story is that at 10 months old, his left eye had to be removed because of cancer in his left eye. And then as he grew and the cancer continued to just spread, he had eye cancer, a rare eye cancer. By the time he got to be 12 years old, the doctor was going to have to do surgery that was going to leave him blind in his other eye. And so as a child, he loved the USC football team. And so the one thing that he wanted to do before he lost his sight completely was to see that team suit up and play and see them practice and be around them just before his surgery, because that was the last thing he wanted to remember seeing. He was so excited. He was so inspiring to that team. They took him to Notre Dame with them when they played Notre Dame, and he was there to motivate them and to inspire them. And he was so excited, and they were excited. He became a part of the USC family. Well, after his surgery, and after he was, as I said, he was 12 years old at the time. After the surgery, then he decided that he was going to be the first blind golfer on the PGA Tour. And he became an incredible golfer. And I sort of lost touch with him. He had written this book with another person called Open Your Eyes. And he talked about how he lived by faith and not by sight. He lived by faith and not by sight. He lived by faith and not by sight, and he was encouraging everyone around him to do the same thing. And in this book, he talked about how there were times when he got depressed, there were times when he got low, when he could not be independent, when he could not join his friends and things that they were going to do unless someone guided him around to do those things. How when he wanted to brush his teeth in the mornings, he couldn't make sure that he had the toothpaste on the toothbrush, or enough on there, or too much on there, or getting the toothbrush to his mouth, and all the things that we take for granted. These were the things he said that could depress him. In fact, he couldn't always join in with the other kids when they were doing things unless someone came and got him and brought him into their presence. And he also said, you know what, I'm not going to focus on that. I'm going to focus on the things I can do. I'm going to focus on the things I can do. So in addition to playing golf, I thought that he was already out there on the PGA Tour. I just learned in the last couple of days that he's this, what did I say he is? A snapper, the long snapper. He's the long snapper for the USC football team. I didn't realize it was the same person until I just started to read about it in the last couple of days. But this is the same guy. He's now 20. This is the same guy who at 16 was going to be a golfer. And he's still blind. And he's very well known, very famous. I just didn't make the connection that this was still Jake Olson. And how inspiring it is to listen to his story, to see how he does things, to see how he has decided that suffering is optional, to see how he has decided to live in love and to walk in the love of God, which is what we all have to learn to do, walk in the love of God. Because that love of God is everywhere present, always. It is always around us. It is always within us. It is always guiding us. It is always directing us. It is always showing us the way. And all we need to do is show up, open and available. Show up, open and available. Show up saying yes. Show up with a higher vibration. Because when we get into that place of suffering and get into the place of looking at what we don't have, what we can't do, how terrible things are, we are in that place of a lower vibration, and so we start to attract more and more things of that same vibratory level into our lives and into our experiences. Everything has a vibration. Energy, everything is energy. Everything has a vibration. When our vibration is down here, we start to attract illness. We start to attract arguments. We start to attract disappointments. We start to attract disease. We start to attract dis-ease of any kind. As we up-level our vibration, we start to attract things that are of a higher vibration, love and joy and peace and harmony and balance, and the things that we want in our lives. This is what we do when we walk in the love of God. Because when we walk in the love of God, we are in the highest vibration. Because the love of God is all there is. The love of God is all there is. The love of God is all there is. And we walk in that love always. The only thing that ever needs to be healed is our sense of separation from God. I always say this. The only thing that ever needs to be healed is our sense of separation from God. When we are sensing that we are separate, and I say sense of separation because we can never be separate. We can never be separate from God. We're always one with God. We are made in the image and likeness and out of God itself. There's nothing that can separate us from it except our idea, our sense of that, our belief in separation. And when we get into that place of sensing separation from God, then we start to act separate. And that's when we get into that place of suffering. We get into the place of focusing on the things that are not going right. And that's not to say that I'm encouraging spiritual bypass of any kind. I'm not. Because I know that there are things that happen in our lives. There are losses that we experience, the death of a loved one, the loss of property, the loss of limb, the loss of a job, the loss of family, whatever the case may be, health issues, all of those things that Howard Thurman calls the vicissitudes of life, the circumstances of life that come along that can plunge us into the depths of hell. The thing for us to do is to acknowledge that's where we are. I'm in the depths of hell right now, and I know that even here God is. Even here the love of God is. Even though I'm walking through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. That's the 23rd Psalm that many of us learned as children. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. And however you want to translate that into metaphysical terms, yea, though I walk through the darkness, God is always walking with me. God is always guiding me. God is always directing me. God is always right where I am. There's no place I can be that God is not. And so what we have to do when we find ourselves in those places, yes, acknowledge this is where I am. Don't set up camp in hell, for goodness sake. Keep walking, keep moving. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. The rod is what the shepherds used to move the sheep along. To fight off the wolves. The staff is what the shepherd used to guide the sheep along. So God is always guiding us, always protecting us. Always guiding us, always protecting us. And as we walk that seemingly long and lonely walk through hell, God is walking right with us, going before us, making straight our way. Always, 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 and in all ways. And what we have to do is believe that. What we have to do is to be in a place of unwavering faith, in a place of trusting God always. Trusting God always. Trusting God more than we trust anything or anybody. Trusting God more than we trust our fears. Trusting God more than we trust our doubts. Trusting God more than we trust the news. Trusting God more than we trust the politicians. Well, that's not hard. But at any rate, you get the point. Trusting God always. Let's take a breath. Letting our trust always be in God. We have to be willing to change. The first thing we have to be willing to change is our focus. Focusing on what we want. Focusing on how we want our lives to be. Focusing on what we want to have happen in our lives. And if we aren't doing the things that will facilitate that, we have to be willing to change so that we can get the things that we want. We can be in the places that we want to be in. We can have the kind of life we want to have. We have to be willing to change. We have to be willing to think differently. We have to be willing to talk differently. We have to be willing to practice differently. We have to be willing to forgive. We have to be willing to give up resistance. We have to be willing to be open and available. We have to be willing to be at one with God. The Sufi master Hafiz says that complaint is only possible when we live in the outskirts of God. Complaint is only possible while living in the outskirts of God. Complaint is only possible while living in the outskirts of God. When we are living in the city limits of God, there's nothing to complain about because we're so focused on that power and that presence that is our very life. We're so focused on that power in which we live and move and have our being. We're so focused on that power that lives and moves and has its being in each one of us that we don't get distracted by those things that are not on our path. We just keep walking forward knowing that we're always walking in the love of God. This is how we get through it. And so we have to be willing to find something to laugh about every day. In addition, I usually say forgive every day, and I still say that, but be willing to find something to laugh about every day. And in every situation, there's always something to laugh about, even if we're laughing at ourselves. And oftentimes, that's the funniest thing, when we're laughing at ourselves. You know, a few years ago, I fell in the bathtub and broke my shoulder. And for 12 weeks, I had to sit up in the bed with my arm in a sling because my shoulder dislocated, so I couldn't lie down. So I had to sit up. So the first night I came home from the hospital with my dominant hand, my dominant arm in a sling, I tried to get in the bed this way. I had stacked the pillows up, and I had to get up in the bed so that I could sit. And as soon as I got in the bed and sat, a pillow slipped. So I got out of bed, and I got the pillows all stacked up right again so that I could get in the bed and sit, and then I got back in the bed, and the pillow slipped just before I could move back. Third time, I got out of the bed, I fluffed up the pillows with my left hand, and then I got back in the bed, and the pillow slipped. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. I was just so frustrated. And all of a sudden, I realized, I heard, suffering is optional. Suffering is optional. You have a long way to go, sister. 12 weeks is going to be a long time to sit up in this bed. And if you're going to cry on the first night, that's going to be real tough. So I just started laughing hysterically. I laughed and laughed and laughed. I had to do those pillows 5 times. And I laughed so hard. And I was sharing a house with a friend of mine, and she came into my bedroom, and she said, "What's going on in here?" And I said, "I can't get these pillows right." She said, "Why are you laughing?" I said, "I better laugh." I found so many things. You'd be surprised at the things I found to laugh about during those 12 weeks that I had to sit in the bed with my arm in a sling. But I laughed about them. I laughed about them. I laughed about them. And I continue to laugh about them as I look back. But my life changed in so many ways. That experience was so deep. That experience gave me the opportunity to go deeper in my spiritual practice. Because sitting up in the bed, there wasn't a lot else I could do. I could watch TV. I did that, but that wasn't enough. So I did a lot of meditation. I learned how to journal with my left hand, because journaling was something that my teachers had been trying to get me to do for years with my non-dominant hand, and I was just, no, I wasn't going to do that. And here I am now. That's the only hand I can use. So I had to change. I had to be willing. And it seemed that Spirit had so much to say during that time. I had to write down so many things during that time because I was writing with my left hand, something I never wanted to do. But I had to be willing to change. I had to be willing to change in learning to accept help or ask for help from other people. One thing I never liked to do, but I had to ask for help. I had a lot of help, but I had to tell people what I wanted. I had to ask somebody to put a sock on. Just little things. I had to learn to ask. I had to change. I had to be willing to change. I had to deepen, as I said, in my spiritual practice, and that's what I invite all of you to do, deepen in your spiritual practice, because that is the thing that brings us into that presence of God in a different kind of way, in a deeper way. Develop your spiritual practice if you don't have one. Deepen in your spiritual practice if you do have one. Whenever I talk about spiritual practice, I'm reminded of my favorite quote from Marianne Williamson's, I think it's A Gift of Change, this book, where she says that if we meditate sometimes but not all times, it seems that God works or helps us sometimes but not all times. If we pray and meditate some days but not all days, we tend to feel the peace of God some days but not all days. If we go to God only when we're in trouble, it seems that God is inconsistent when the inconsistency lies within us. The more we go to God and the more time we spend with God, the more we build our spiritual musculature and the stronger we become in dealing with life's challenges. And so when we go to God for God, just go to God to be with God. That helps us to broaden our availability. That helps us to strengthen our ability to handle the challenges of the day. That helps us to become one with God and to recognize our oneness with God in a totally different kind of way. That's what's important when it comes to looking at suffering or looking at love. We're either in love or we're in suffering. They're kind of on different ends of the spectrum. When we are suffering, we just close God out no matter what's going on in our lives. When we are open and available and walking in oneness with God, then we know that we are at one. We know that we are at home. we know that we are in that place where love is all, and that love does have everything to do with it. And so I invite you today to make a choice. Choose love. Choose love. Choose love in every situation. Choose love in every circumstance. When you're dealing with people that you can't stand, choose love. When you're dealing with situations that you can't stand, choose love. When you're dealing with yourself, and there are sometimes we can't stand ourselves and the things that we do or think or how the ways that we act, choose love. Love is always the answer. Always the answer. Did I say love is always the answer? It's always the answer. And so I invite you today, ask the question, what does love have to do with it? It has everything to do with it. It has everything to do with it. Love loves to love. Love loves to love. And so let us just keep on being love. Let's turn within. Taking a breath together here and now. Just recognizing that there's only one power, one presence, one mind, one life, one breath, one love. I choose to call it God. But by any other name is the source of our being. That power, that presence. Knowing that that power, that presence is my life and the life of each of us here this day. And so knowing this truth, I speak the word for each of us, speaking a word of love as we open our hearts and open our minds and open our entire being to love, choosing love. This love heals all. It heals our dis-ease. It heals our suffering. It heals our illnesses, our losses, our pain, our grief, our anger, all that stuff. We can just release it and let it go because it is healed by that holy presence of love in our lives. And so just knowing that love has everything to do with everything. How grateful I am to know that each of us is experiencing love in our lives right here and right now. No matter what the situation or circumstance may be, love is the answer. And that's what we are calling forth right here and right now. And so I'm just sending this love out onto this planet, just knowing that every situation and circumstance has love in its midst. God in its midst. God is love. And God is in the midst of everything. So as I open the circle of prayer, I pause momentarily so that you may speak the names of anyone you'd like held in prayer. You may speak their names silently or loud, but you may speak them now. And so for all those whose names were spoken here this day, I'm just knowing that right where each of them is, God is blessing and keeping each and every one of them. I'm speaking a special word of blessing for Reverend Michelle, knowing that right where she is, God is blessing and keeping her as she rests and relaxes and restores and rejuvenates during this period of sabbatical. And speaking a word of perfect health and wholeness for Lonnie, knowing that right where he is, God is. And that every fiber of his being is being healed by that radiant presence of God, just as every fiber of our being is being healed by that presence of God. This word goes out to anyone on this planet needing a prayer this day, knowing that God is everywhere, present, loving, lifting up, healing. And so I just say thank you, Father, Mother God. Thank you, infinite presence. Thank you, Divine Mother. And so it is. Amen.